This week on Dig Me Out. With your hosts, Jason Zia and Tim Manici.
Jay, we're back again with another episode thanks to our Dig Me Out Union on Patreon. You can help us make the next episode happen by joining us at dmounion.com or digmeoutunion.com. And Jay, I am belated on this. We had a new union member join us. Jeremy. Jeremy has spoken. I don't have a last name. It's just Jeremy. Joins a number of other, we have other Jeremys, or at least one. How many Jeremys do we have? Can you do a quick count?
I can think of one.
I think of one. Maybe we've had more, and some have dropped off over the years. But we have a mainstay Jeremy, so we're gonna have to apply some nicknames now for Jeremy Original, and then Jeremy 2, maybe something like that. Jeremy Alpha, Jeremy Beta.
Hopefully, Jeremy has a last name that starts with a letter that we could use.
Yes, that would be helpful. Well, we already have a Jeremy
welcome,
A,
Jeremy.
So maybe this will be Jeremy B. Or Jeremy Baramy.
I hope that would work out nicely.
Yes. Speaking of patrons, we have one joining us from across the globe, from across the curvature of the earth, bouncing off of satellites, coming into our homes from the future. Need to welcome back to the show, Mr. Michael Jins. Michael, how are you?
Good. How are you?
Good. How is Saturday morning for you? Is everything good now? Has the hurricane passed us? Tell us how we're doing.
Very nice outside, bit cloudy, bit colder than usual. Well, it is spring. Yeah,
What?
spring here.
Well, yeah, it makes sense because it's turning into fall here, and it's spring on their side
Tim,
of the
that,
planet.
That doesn't make sense.
It never makes sense. I know.
I can get my head around the time of day change, but the season change, I refuse to accept that that's real.
You should be here at Christmas time where it's like, close to 40 degrees or close to like 100 Fahrenheit,
Yeah.
and you're in. Just the complete opposite, no snow.
Thank you for
Blazing
making the
heat.
conversion to Fahrenheit, because I would have been like 40 degrees. That's not warm at all. I'm like, that's obviously Celsius. But since we did not embrace that measurement system, nor the metric system, we are eternally befuddled by the measurements around the planet. So last year you brought to us an album that we were unfamiliar with, but we were enchanted. That was, I still can't say the name correctly. Sigur
Cigarette.
Yeah, but what? Everybody knows what I'm messing up. I'm not even going to try to pronounce the album title because there's all a bunch of little lines over things, and there's a weird AE thing happening. So we're not going to even try that.
Do you know it, Michael? What is the album title?
Excuse my pronunciation. Algaitis Birion.
Beautiful.
Sure. There's not Algaitis. There's not even an L in there. I don't even know how you're getting that. Is that what the AE
nice thing is
happens?
that Tim lowers the bar so far on pronunciation that if you stumble through some words, you're going to be okay.
Exactly. I'm like the the limbo king of mispronunciations. So you're returning with us. You've made a pick. Please share with our audience the album that you have selected for 2024.
I've selected an Australian band from Geelong called Magic Dirt, and it's their second album called Young and Full of the Devil.
Young and Full of the Devil. I do
Nice album title.
really love that album title. That is a great album title. So how did you discover, was this a band that you were on board with early in their career? Is this something you found later and went back to?
I first saw them in February of 1994. I had absolutely no idea who they were, hadn't heard of them. I travelled down to Melbourne from a small country town about 3 hours away to to go to the big day out in Melbourne in 1994, where the last three bands on the stages was Soundgarden, Ramones, Bjork, Soundgarden. And also on the same bill was Smashing Pumpkins. And I got completely blown away by Smashing Pumpkins. And they were doing a sideshow in early February in this small venue called the Prince of Wales in St Kilda. And Magic Dirt were the second support act. And so I had no idea who this band was. I was on the barrier to see Smashing Pumpkins, and so I got fully assaulted also by Magic Dirt. I had a beer thrown on me by the drummer, and I was blown away by what they did. They had only released, I think, their first EP at this stage.
Mm-hmm.
They'd only been touring or so for maybe a year, maybe a bit longer. And was just blown away by what they did, their guitar noodling, and then they just became my favourite band, one of two favourite Aussie bands, though. Just whenever they came to Sydney, I would go to every show and just see them as much as possible.
So that EP, I think you're talking about, in November of 1993, they put out their debut EP called Signs of Satanic Youth. Yes. Satanic, the devil. This is clearly an evil band.
I like it.
Yes.
Yes. That was on Agogo, which is a Australian-based indie label that's been around since the 70s, actually. And this record we're talking about, Young and Full of the Devil, is their second full-length album, which also came out on Agogo, but it was released in April of 1998. So, Jay, had you ever heard of Magic Dirt?
Just I think recently, probably on the Discord or one of our Australian friends mentioning them as a band we should do at some point, or the band they liked. I just knew the name. I always thought it was a cool name.
Yeah, I didn't hear any of the music before doing this episode. I just had heard the name and figured at some point we were going to get to them, since we're contractually obligated to cover all Australian bands from the 90s. That's
right.
Part of our agreement with the Australian listeners. So a little bit of history.
History of the band.
On Magic Dirt. Do you know history, Michael? Do you have stuff that you can share before I read off of Wikipedia?
Oh, that's all I know is from Wikipedia.
Gotcha.
And and then like how they members changed and that sort of thing. Yeah.
So you mentioned they were from Geelong, Victoria. Where is that? If we're looking at Australia, what part of the country is that in?
Okay, so Geelong. So do you know? Okay, it's in Victoria.
Okay.
So do you know where Melbourne is in Victoria? Like down on the bottom coast?
I know it's south.
Mm-hmm.
It's like the very south and then east part of the country. Yes.
So there's Port Phillip Bay. Okay, I could be getting my geography wrong. There's Port Phillip Bay. Melbourne is up here at the sort of like top of it, and Geelong is following the coast down, I think, west.
Okay.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure how far it is, but it's like it's not too far from Melbourne, like probably 100 k's or less, maybe.
Okay.
I'm not sure. I've never been.
Kind of towards Adelaide.
Yes,
Okay.
but not.
Look at Jay.
Not in a different time zone.
I mean, I'm looking at a map.
Oh, okay. Got it. I was gonna be like, Jay knows his Australian.
And I recently watched a documentary about the Tasmanian tiger, so I know where Tasmania and Melbourne is.
Oh, okay, sure. Why not? So the band formed in 1991. It was Daniel Herring on guitar, Adam Robertson on drums, Adalita Srsen There's like a missing vowel in that name. It's Srsen. Is that how you know how to say that, Michael?
When they first started, it was just her first name. She never really used her last name
Got it.
too much. It was just later on that she would start having it on print. She just did Adalita.
Got it. And then Dean Turner on bass. They're originally called the Deer Bubbles. Then they split up and then formed into the Jim Jims. So I mentioned that they put out their first EP in 1993. They followed that up in 1994 with Life Was Better, November of 94, also released on Go Go. And then following that, we have the Friends in Danger album, which came out in September of 1996, also on a Go Go. As mentioned, Young and Full of the Devil came out. Now there's some lineup changes in there. The original bass player, not bass player, guitarist Dave Thomas. Not actually, he was not original. They had some switching around, right? Dave came in 95. He left in 97, and he was replaced by Raul Sanchez in 97, who is still in the band to this day. He was from Spain, and he was in a different band, and he actually went back and still recorded with the other band at times. Do I have that right, Michael? Do you know? Okay.
Yeah.
So for this album is Raul Sanchez on guitar and moving forward. After this record, they actually had signed an American deal before this record. American rep had saw them opening for somebody in Australia and signed them, and they gave them this record, and they were like, what? How are we going to release this in 1998 in America? Like, where's your single? And they're like, we don't have a single.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, okay, well, we're gonna put this out, but we're not promoting it, and we'll put you on a tour. And they ended up touring the US with I forgot who it was.
Was it Archers of Loaf?
Yes, that's right. It was Archers of Loaf. And they had no tour support. The record label basically washed their hands of them, and they said, not only we're not supporting you, we're going to pay you to go away. So we're going to pay for your next record. Just leave. And they gave them the money for the record to leave. So the next record they recorded for a different record label. They recorded it for East West. It was called "What Are Rock Stars Doing Today," and it came out in October of 2000. That was followed by "Tough Love," released in August of 2003. Then they signed to Warner Music Australia and released Snow White in September of 2005. And then they moved to Emergency Music, which I think might have been their own label, or it's a small indie because it doesn't have a Wikipedia entry. That they released in June of 2007 Rocky's Room, and then in July of 2007 Beast. But those are I think they're like sort of experimental records.
Yep.
Rocky's Room is like all noise. And then Beast is like a rock mini album. It's not a full length. I think based on what I read. And then they put out the album Girl in 2008. And that's the last of the new material. They did put out an EP for the song White Boy, which I think was from the last record, and that included a couple of extra tracks. And they went on to do other things. Adalita has released some solo records, but shortly after this, so they put out that in 2008. In 2009, Dean Turner passed away. He had I can't. It's basically a form of cancer, and it's really, really long name of cancer. But he knew he had it for a number of years, and it just sort of eventually made it impossible for him to tour and that kind of thing, and that broke them up. At that point, they did do a tour in honor of him for that, and went off to do their own things. And then 10 years later, they played a show together at the end of Adalita's solo show, and started playing some package tours. So they went out on a tour in 2019 called Hotter Than Hell with, listen to these names: Spiderbait, Shihad, 28 Days, all bands we've talked about on this podcast.
Yeah.
And Body Jar. We have not covered Body Jar.
Mm.
And then they
The Dig Me
also
Out tour.
Yeah, exactly. And then they also did a tour with who was it? It was like UMI, and then another tour with Jesus and Mary Chain, Liz Phair, Happy Mondays, and Fortet. Or there was a festival, actually, not a tour. And then they did another traveling tour with the Dandy Warhols, Wolf Mother, Jebediah, and Eskimo Joe. They were going to do some stuff in 2020 and 2021. Obviously, that didn't happen because of the pandemic. They've done a number of reissues, as mentioned. This album was reissued in 2020, and it actually charted when it was reissued. It made it to number 78 on the ARIA albums chart. And they did an anniversary tour for this record. They had Steve Patrick playing bass for the reunion stuff. I don't know if he was in another band or, from a different, or just a friend, or I don't know. There's not any info on that. But they did a cover last year for a compilation of Mushroom Records artists, and they did the song I'm Stranded, which is the famed punk single by the Saints, which, if you've ever listened to the Sound Opinions podcast, that's their intro song, is I'm Stranded by the Saints. That's like, in terms of like punk rock songs, like that to me, in terms of like notoriety, is like up there with like Blitzkrieg Bop and God Save the Queen. And like, it's just like one of those iconic punk rock songs from the late 70s. So if people have not checked it out, it's a great punk rock single from that era. That's the history condensed. I don't want to go insane with the history, but that's the basic history of Magic Dirt, which I did not know. I didn't realize that they were like still around. Like, I figured this was one of those bands that, you read about bands and they're like 3 albums and then they're done. But it seems like, aside from the passing of the guitar player, or bass player, I mean, they've actually continued to do some stuff, whether as a band or independently of each other. So we had some comments over at Patreon. I'm going to share them. Darren Leach said, I grew up listening to Triple J Radio, and they played Magic Dirt quite a lot, but I found I was only interested in some of the singles, so it's an EP for me. Gavin said, awesome choice, Michael. I've been meaning to get to Magic Dirt, and this is the right album. And then Keith Preston said, so I thought the first 3 songs on this album were excellent. The drummer sounded amazing, and I was really looking forward to joining the whole album. Then the 4th song hit, and they turned into Sonic Youth Jr. The songs seemed to become secondary to creating sound collages, and they lost me. I was constantly checking the running time on the songs, waiting for them to end, and I was relieved when the album was finally over. I'm going to take the first 3 songs and make a very short EP. So with those comments, we have to see how the poll shakes out for this album. Were the album better EP or decent single? But Jay, we're both new to Magic Dirt. This is our first time. So what worked for you on Young and Full of the Devil?
Well, for those of you who are on our Patreon and can see the video, Tim has a backdrop of just an arsenal of pedals and effects that, feature heavily on this record. So, what works for me is, in particular, is this big octave fuzz bass stuff going on throughout most of these songs. It really brings this dimension to the band where it just fills up so much space that even when they're quiet, the guitars can be a little sparse, the vocal can be spoken and kind of developing and subtle, but everything takes on this just depth and inherent heaviness because of the effects being used and the bass tone and just throughout the whole record. When they all get loud, this takes the first song, Babycakes, kind of a slow build. And then as the band really gets louder and louder, I mean, it's just an avalanche. By the time they kick in the effects on that bass, it's just an avalanche of sound. It's crushing at some points. It can feel a little like, and then within that, I think they also do a good job of like pushing the boundaries, just a little bit. It's not just one style that they're presenting with that tone. They can do some stuff where, she sounds a little like stoner rock or desert rock. It's got a little bit more tempo. It's, a little more down strumming and like got that heavy groove to it. But then they can move to a punk hard rock space with Rabbit with Fangs, still using that super heavy tone, but shaking up the style a little bit. And then you get the Shrinko, which it might be 3/4. I'm not quite sure, but there's a time signature rhythm shift there that lets the bass open up and be super melodic. And it's kind of busy in that song. It's not just like playing root notes and down strumming. It's moving a lot and really helping the vocal melody quite a bit. So, they're also finding, a vocabulary beyond just like the tone, in the way that they're playing and presenting this stuff. I think that heaviness with that bass tone and all those effects combined with the vocal, which is somewhere in the space of, it's a female vocal, it's a little raspy, it can do the spoken confident delivery stuff, but also get to like I don't want to say like a scream, but like, pushing some air, getting some volume, intensity. guess I would describe it somewhere in the space between like a Brody Dahl and a Courtney Love in terms of like what the voice sounds like. But that combination of, of that voice and that bass sound and some of that bass is probably coming from the guitars too. At some points it gets almost mushed together. You're not quite sure. But that heavy low end with this expressive singer with a lot of attitude, that's able to sit above that, with her vocal range. It's a pretty compelling sound. It gets you this, at times grungy, at times a little desert rock, a little garagey, psychedelic sometimes. You can play in a lot of different spaces, but always deliver energy. I think, or at least with the songs that I think that are working really well here, they're putting those pieces together and it's just like erupting with this energy, from these effects and this pedal and just the band, the way they play. It's kind of bubbling and percolating with this electricity, that's present here. So Yeah, big fan of the sound of this band and the way that they're constructing some of these songs, you know, in a with some looseness, you know, but um and at times it gets very experimental, but also, you know, there's a handful of tracks here that have a lot of structure to them too. So that's what's working for me. How about you, Tim?
I mean, this record sounds enormous. The you said it, the fuzzed out bass, and there's in the picture that I'm using as my backdrop, there's several fuzz pedals and distortion pedals of all kinds, and it's not surprising because it just when they kick it in, like you said, there's a number of songs that start small and they allow them to either build or they kick in a big way, and you just get this wall of distortion that is very stoner, that is very desert rock in a way that I was frankly surprised, because the way the album starts out, especially, so you get the Babycakes, which sort of builds for a while, and then She-Riff, Rabbit with Fangs, and Shrinko are all pretty solid punches to the face. Then it sort of goes into this in the same way that like a Caius record would, where you would get like, you know, Green Machine or whatever, and you get these rock songs, and then they would just blow up the whatever they were doing and be like, now we're gonna do some really weird shit. Now the drugs are kicking in, and the whatever we've been smoking is definitely going to start affecting what we're doing, because then you get really long, you get like 7-minute long, 9-minute long jams where there's just not just that the music gets over the top, but there's some crazy stuff happening, like lyrically. There's a song, These Drugs Are Really Starting to Fuck Me Over, where she starts screaming mafia over and over again. And I'm just like, what is going on? What is the mafia doing in this song? How? And she's I think she's yelling cocksucker in a number of in the lyrics as well, a number of times. And I'm just like, I don't want to piss her off. Like there's clearly some issues that are being thrashed out through this. There's some catharsis happening because it's just so just huge sounding, which is interesting because, you know, in doing the research for this record and doing some of the looking into their overall career, it sounds like they drastically changed their sound, going like they got rid of a lot of this fuzzy stuff and really sort of honed it down to more condensed songs with less noise. So that's an interesting shift to me, because you can hear where they have the songwriting chops. There's especially on the first half of the record, where they've got hooks. I watched a live video of them playing She-Riff on some Australian show from like 1998 or something. I don't remember what it was called, but
Recovery.
Yes. And they were rocking out. I mean, they looked like a rock band that you would see on a big stage. They were commanding it, and she's a presence when you watch her sing. Like she's got the somewhere in between like Courtney Love and Kim Gordon from Sonic Youth, and you mentioned Brody Dale, and I was thinking of like, is it Danita Sparks from L7? Just has that like presence where you're like, oh, this person's got it. Like they're clearly understand how to be the lead singer, not just and also playing guitar at the same time. I really enjoyed her personality as far as bringing interesting lyrics, bringing interesting melodies, having an abrasive voice, but that was also melodic. And that can be hard to do because sometimes you get so abrasive, you lose the melody and it's just a lot of screaming, which this is not. It's a lot of, it's raspy and it's, you know, it sounds like her throat's probably shredded at the end of every performance, but there is something very entrancing about that. And I know I tend to rip on songs that go too long, albums that go too long, but I do enjoy a good like psychedelic freak out jam every once in a while where there's just a lot of noisy guitar happening and just crazy stuff. So like Short Black, for example, is a minute, not even a minute and a half. It's this blazing, you know, short rock song. And that to me is as interesting as them playing like the last track, Babycakes You Always Freeze Me Up. There's actually an untitled bonus track. So if you have the original, I guess it just goes into it. So it's 18 minutes. But if you go onto streaming now, they split them up into separate tracks. Those are two opposite extremes of this band, but I find them both compelling. I like to hear the big noise and the freak out aspect of it. It reminds me of, you know, weird psychedelic music of the late 60s and early 70s where there was a lot of acid and that kind of stuff. And that to me can be interesting. Now, not all the time. I wouldn't put this on when there's any family around. Nobody's going to like this in my house. But I did enjoy listening, especially with headphones, because it's just so enormous. So, Michael, you brought this record to us. What works for you on this album?
You've both said it before. The fuzz, I love it. This was I think one of the first bands that, like, so the bass player uses a big muff. Raoul uses two different big muffs, and Adalita uses a distortion pedal. They all have wah-wah pedals. And then everything else, like there's some delay, there's the octave that I think Dean had more pedals than Adalita.
Mm-hmm.
And so in sometimes seeing them live, you know, when they would go off on a tangent, you'd have one or more of them using a wah-wah pedal, but not necessarily using it differently, like just setting it to a particular tone on the wah, and doing that, and changing that gradually during a song, something like that. But yeah, that was the largeness. Give me a good dirty bass sound any day, and you've got me hooked. I do like. There's certain sounds that they do, like there's incorporating feedback into songs. So there's a sound that goes all the way through, and it's the sort of whistling guitar feedback. That's Adalita.
Okay.
And just give me fuzz, give me controlled feedback. And you've got me partially hooked already. And so that was what got me for this band when I first saw them live after having no idea who they were. I do like their longer song. Well, I do like their sort of more trippier songs, like These Drugs Are Really Starting to Fuck Me Over, which I think was a point of this album, because after this album, they changed their sound and went more structured, less longer songs. So this, I do like on this album, Adalita's voice does have a level of raspiness to it. You can hear from their first EPs and their first album, her voice change. She doesn't scream as much on this album as she did on the previous ones. She didn't like really drive her throat. But with this one, you can sort of hear that she has a more natural raspiness to her voice, like especially in the song like Ascot Red. You can just hear it. There's a different texture to her voice.
It's just the way things are. It's not rejection, you said. Sometimes things out of my hands collapse dead straight to the bed. I can see the white moraines, little planets out of your hands. It's not rejection, you say. It's just things ending in a.
But yeah, that's basically it. Like just the riffs, fuzz.
Mm-hmm. I wanted to mention that the wah-wah thing, for people who don't know, essentially a wah-wah is like a filter, and it is when you push the pedal up and down. Most people associate it with like funk or disco, like
Like 70s. Voodoo Child by
Voodoo Child
by Jimi
exactly.
Hendrix. That's the wah-wah, the stereotypical wah-wah sound.
Exactly. And it is an opening and a closing of the filter. But if you just leave it at a particular angle,
yeah,
you can create a really interesting tone that will remove a little bit of whatever you don't want. Like if you want a little less bass in there, you just move that filter down a little bit, and all of a sudden you're basically able to on the fly create new tones for your guitar.
Kind of like having an EQ on a pedal where you're kind of, gradually changing it.
Yep.
There was always I don't know how true this was, but that Eddie Van Halen would use a wah, but he would leave it in the up position or the down position, whichever of the two, to like use it as an EQ.
Right. And it's really hard. I mean, it's literally like just a lever that goes up and down. So if you want to get it in a certain spot, you have to sort of, know exactly where to rest it, because it's just like a lever. There's no clicks in there for you to like go, oh, it's 3 clicks down or something like that. So it is a little bit of a finesse aspect of getting those sounds. I'm glad you brought up Ascot Red. That was an interesting song that's not like the rest of the record. And that reminded me of something quieter on like the whole record that we did, where Courtney Love sort of dials back the aggression and just plays with either an acoustic guitar or a clean electric or something like that. And it lets you hear her voice more plainly. And I thought that worked well. I think the song's a little long for that, but I do like her just being by herself essentially on that.
Makes
song.
It more intimate. You go from this like big, like bombastic record that's in your face and kind of like shaking you by the collar to like this moment where you're just alone in the room with one person.
Right. So is there anything that doesn't work for you on the album, Jay?
I really like how the songs develop through the first half of the record. It seems very purposeful to me. So let me start with that. So you start with Babycakes, which is a slow build. It introduces the sound of the band halfway through the song, in that you get the full picture, right? So you kind of get like the quieter sound of the band. You get the dynamic, and then you get the big avalanche tone. Then you move into She-Riff. The energy comes up, starts to introduce like this fuzzy stoner rock vibe. That song gets a little tighter. Rabbit with Fangs gets a little bit more like melodic, tighter. Shrinko gets a little tighter, to the point where it's kind of this rollicking sing-along almost. So there's this really cool, conceptually like expansive band that's over time of this record is getting tighter and shifting time signatures and like playing with the sound a little bit, but like compressing things and getting like distilled. And then you get to track 6, which opens up again. So that's these drugs are really starting to fuck me over. And then you get this long intro that's kind of quiet, and it's getting a bit of like an art rock avant-garde tone to me, like a Sonic Youth vibe going in the early portion of that. The vocals a little more spoken, the instrumentation's a little bit more sparse. Kicks in halfway through, and you sort of get like a more dynamic second half. But then that from that point forward, the record to me feels scattershot, like short black. I love that riff. I want it to be a song, but it's not really a song. It's just kind of like a minute and a half of a cool riff, which I think could have been a killer song. So to me, that almost feels like a demo idea or something. So I'm going from like this super well crafted, thought out, in my mind at least, like experience to like, okay, now I'm starting to hear like collages and ideas for songs. I think Ascot Red's the same thing. Like, I love the idea. I love hearing the intimacy. It's got a really clever little, melodic twist in that song that works really well. I like how the guitars and her are working together there in a kind of a really pretty way. Like, as she's hitting these notes, you're hearing these high, clean guitars hitting, but it goes on and on and on and doesn't really develop into anything interesting. Like, it's almost diminishes the more you listen to it. It becomes less interesting. I was like super in for the first minute and a half, and then as the song goes on, I'm like, this isn't really going anywhere. And then X-Ray and Babycakes, and then the Untitled track at the end. It's more experimental. It's more kind of looser, noisy. So I just start to lose the script on the second half of this record. I feel like I really got a good sense of like who the band is through the first, say, 6 tracks. And then through the last, 5, you include the bonus track, I'm left scratching my head. I'm feeling like I'm hearing like ideas for another album or demos, and then some jams and or just an experimental record that's not really related to the first half. So I think that's big picture. What didn't work for me is just, it's almost two completely different sides, really, and not a ton of cohesion between side A and B. Anything that worked for you, Tim?
Yeah, a lot of the same issues. I think the order is part of the issue. I think if you, like, for example, if you moved X-Ray, which is long, but if you move that to 5 instead of What Have I Done, X-Ray starts like right away, and it goes, again, it's a longer song, but it has more noise and at the beginning than, say, that These Drugs Are Really Starting to Fuck Me Over. I think you have What Have I Done, which is a quiet song, and that's 3 minutes, and then essentially you have the first 3 minutes of These Drugs Are Really Starting as quiet. So you have like 6 minutes of just quiet, of just guitar and vocal for the most part. And I think if you maybe even just swapped What Have I Done and X-Ray, that might be helpful. I agree with you on Short Black. Like, oh, that could have been a great song. Either turn it into a song or don't put it on the record, because that's like a tease. Like, I wanted that to be more. Like, when it started, I was like, oh yeah, okay.
Me too. I was
and
like,
then,
ooh,
oh, what? No, where'd it
need a
go?
rocker here. It's also that span of the record. It goes a long time without a vocal, which is
mhm.
I love her voice. So I'm like, as I'm into that section of the record, I'm like, when does she come back and start singing again? It's been a long time.
Yeah. Ascot Red, I'm right with you. Like it should have been maybe 4 minutes. I didn't need it to be 7:22.
Right.
And then the final like 18 and a half minutes essentially of the album, there's a lot of cool stuff there. There's a lot of noise. When the second song starts, it's just this gigantic thing happening, and it's fun, but it's not something that I want to listen to on repeat. Like the songs that really connect with me are really good, and I want to keep those in rotation. But I have to be in the mood to hear that much guitar feedback and noodling, when there isn't as clear a chorus or an idea, excuse me, that is shown to us at the beginning of the record. So I think that's just the thing, is like I know that this band can do some killer stuff, but again, I mean, they said it in their in their it's in the Wikipedia. Dean Turner said that they just smoked a lot of hash and took some acid, and they would just jam for like 15 hours.
Yeah.
And so that makes sense. Like you're probably going in with some songs that are finished, or that you have ideas, and then you get She-Riff and you get Rabbit with Fangs and you get Shrinko. And then when the stuff's kicking in and you're just like, let's just hit every pedal, and then you get the bonus track, or then you get some of the weirder stuff that's happening, and which is fine for certain times. It's just not something I want to hear on repeat. So it's definitely, I have to be in the mood for it. Michael, is there anything that doesn't work for you on the album?
Maybe like they seem to have spent a fair bit of time on the two versions of Babycakes, especially the second one, which has like multiple guitar layers, and messing around with, utilizing feedback and just sounds. Maybe if they'd spent taken some of that time and put it into short stack to develop that into something a little bit longer, or maybe putting some lyrics to it. There's X-Ray and Shrinko aren't my favorites of the album.
Okay.
When I listen to the album, I always listen all the way through. I always listen to an album all the way through. I don't skip anything. But yeah, those two don't hit me as well as some of the other tracks. I'm a big fan of when they released this album. She-Riff and Rabbit with Fangs were released as singles. And you can't get them on streaming, which is really annoying, because the Rabbit with Fangs has Magic Dirt live at the Big Day Out in Melbourne in 1997. And you can hear, like I was there, and I remember once they finished, I was sort of like looking around just going, what the hell was that? They were just almost on fire kind of scenario. But those two tracks don't really grab me as much as anything else on the album.
Interesting. Okay. I think I like Shrinko. It is weird to hear them playing in that like 3/4 swings style. I don't really think of that as being like a fuzz guitar. I don't think I've ever heard a band that's played that fuzzy using that time signature.
I think that's why I liked it though, because I was like, ooh, this kind of works for this time signature, because it just turns into this big like swinging, sloshing, like, avalanche of stuff. You just imagine like it's chaotic and huge. I'm kind of surprised that it worked as well as it did.
So I did mention this this was released in the US on or no, maybe it was the previous record. Maybe I'm wrong about that. I'm looking at the. Yeah, I'm sorry. It was the previous album that got the U.S. release, and they made this album with the money that Warner gave them to go away. This actually didn't get a U.S. release when it came out, even though they toured with. They came over and toured with Arch's Loaf, as we mentioned earlier. So it shouldn't be a surprise that this did not chart in the U.S. or have any major impact because it wasn't actually released here like the first album. And I think the album, the one after that on East West, that actually did not get a US release either. It got released in the UK. That's interesting. So they're only their first album, it looks like, actually got a US release, unless they did some of these other ones. So not really a discussion on why wasn't it bigger here, because guess what? They weren't going to get any airplay unless some radio programmer happened to pick them up by accident or was really tuned into Australian music. I don't think they were going to be playing this at college radio. But I feel like in like this sort of predates the fuzzy desert rock that we talked about. I mean, this band could have opened for Caius or Queens of the Stone Age in '98. I guess Caius was done. This is probably when Queens were starting up. But they're in a weird space where like they kind of sound grungy, and grunge is essentially dead in the US at this point. You're getting like second, third wave grunge bands that don't sound anything like this. And even Sonic Youth has like cleaned up their sound to a certain degree with albums like Rather Ripped. Although I think Rather Ripped might be like a year or two later. So I don't know. I don't know that this would have ever caught on beyond college radio if it had been released here. I don't see any sort of, there's no commercial aspect of this, I don't think.
What year was this?
98.
Yeah, I mean, I'm with you with the desert stuff, you know. Caius, or even, you know, as Queen starts to form in the late 90s, and this isn't that. I'm also thinking of bands like, remember Boris?
Yep.
That's a band that I always imagined was going to sound like what Magic Dirt does, but they don't as much. Like they're a little more experimental, but
yes,
there was definitely like late 90s, early 2000s, a, you know, sort of heavy low end, you know, either stoner rock or desert rock or adjacent type bands that were, you know, indie success, right?
Right.
Which I think is hard for Australian bands in America. That means because you have to come here and tour, which is expensive and difficult. So,
Michael, if we were going to check out another record by this band to get a taste of their other sound, is there a particular album we should check out?
Kind of torn between that, because their first two EPs are really, you can see the difference of like where they were starting. Like there was a lot more noodling. They used the wah pedals more. I mean, their first album is also kind of good. Well, there's just as much noodling in this. Like, there's like an instrumental track which has got like a baby kind of, which does have a baby on it. The drummer had just had a son, and he was called Dylan, and it's called, I think, Dylan's Lullaby. And they have a microphone near him and just baby noises. But the last track on that is a song called I Was Cruel, and it's just a blistering guitar assault. It's a long song. It goes up, it goes down. But the album after this, I think, was their most sort of commercial. Their sound changes. They do sort of more structured, shorter songs. There's a song called Dirty Jeans, which was the single, which is probably their most played song, or streamed, I should say. But It's kind of hard. Me personally would skew towards the first two EPs.
Okay. Yeah, because it seems like a band that changed around a little bit for each record. Like they were not always sound. There's bands that, you know, we've talked about, like AC/DC. They're always AC/DC. But then you have a band like Catherine Wheel, which Catherine Wheel kind of put out a different record each time. They didn't always put out the same record. So what you like about them might not be what you what you like from the first to the last album.
But it seems like we just reviewed the record that's splitting the difference.
Yeah.
Maybe, right?
Seems like it.
You're getting a little bit of everything.
Yeah. All right. Let's go to our final ratings for this album. I'll share our poll results from Patreon in just a moment. But Jay, where do you land? Is this a worthy album, a better EP, or decent single?
It's a better EP for me. I would just take the first 6 tracks, and I even think These Drugs are a great ender. In terms of showing off, it's bookended with 2 tracks then that are a little more expansive and, you know, kind of show off that a little bit more of the creative side of the band, the expansive side of the band. And then you've got some, you know, compact, you know, more popish format songs in the middle. So better EP for me. Where'd you land, Tim?
This is tough because I do like quite a bit of the record. I just wish it was a little bit different. I wish Ascot Red was shorter. I wish Short Black was longer and it had vocals. So that's 2 of the tracks. I do like X-Ray better than What Have I Done? So I'm probably at a better EP. First 4, then X-Ray, then These Drugs Are yada yada yada. And then I would end it with one of the noisy tracks at the end, the first Babycakes, and not the second half of that noise aspect of the band. So I'm at like 7, which is it would put me at a good 35-minute EP, I think. So I think that's a good amount of material for this band. In terms of I would want to listen to it again. Like after listening to this, I had to like give myself a little break, especially when I was doing with the ear with my headphones on and having it cranked. I was like, okay, I gotta go give my ears a rest. That's a lot of fuzz in my ears.
It gave my subwoofer a workout, I'll tell you that.
It's
like, whoa.
Yep. Michael, where do you land?
I landed at an album.
Okay.
I would maybe reconsider Shrinko or X-Ray. And maybe edit, Short Stack if that could be longer. I think they recorded this themselves in a house. I think it was in a house. And they just had maybe didn't have the time, or they gave themselves a set time. But maybe if they had developed Short Stack a bit more, it could have added to the album. But I would maybe lose one of those 2 tracks, but still keep everything else.
Well, our Patreon community, they agreed with you, Michael. 63% were the album, 25% better EP, 13% decent single. How about that?
Nice.
We have been outvoted, Jay. We now get demoted to the from the Premier League down to the I don't know what the league below, the Champions League. That's all very confusing to me.
Yes.
Everything I know about soccer I learned from Ted Lasso. So that's it. Michael, thank you for bringing this album to us in our quest to completely cover all Australian music. This was one that was missing, so I greatly appreciate it. And I think our community is happy too, because they rated this overall a worthy album, so they're happy as well. I know this is, I don't remember who talked about it, but this was definitely talked about in the Discord by people. So
A couple of episodes ago, you did a thing on early 2000s,
Mhm.
and you did an Australian band from Brisbane. Oh, gee, their name is... I've forgotten their name, but their first album, they had the song called Jesus Stole My Girlfriend. But their first album was produced by Dean. And so that was, I think, the first time you spoke about Magic Dirt on the pod.
was it Violent Soho?
Yes, Violet Soho, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, that was on their debut, I think. Or not their debut. It was on oh yeah, it was. It was on their self-titled debut. Got it. Okay. Well, thank you for spending your Saturday morning with us and our Friday evenings. We always appreciate you bringing this stuff that we haven't heard. I'm not even going to try to say what we did last year because I'm just going to mess it up. But we enjoyed that record and
Cigar
we enjoyed
Rose.
There we sugar rose.
Sugar Rose.
Sugar Rose.
Just say the second most well-known Icelandic band.
What's the
Sorry,
first?
Iceland, Bjork.
Oh, yeah. I guess that's right.
Come on, Tim.
I'm sorry. I thought that maybe like there was some band that I didn't know that was from Iceland that is huge. My bad. Well, if you would like to be like Michael, you can head on over to dmounion.com or digmeoutunion.com to join the union. You can vote in polls like this for our albums selected by our patrons, or you can vote in the polls that are submitted via digmeoutpodcast.com. Albums are submitted, they go into our hopper, and then once a month we have a poll where a whole bunch of albums enter and one leaves. We'll have a poll episode coming up soon.
Yeah, it's almost October, so
Yep.
time to get them out again.
Churning them out. And also at Patreon, you get access to our Discord where we talk about all sorts of things. There was this whole weird discussion today about rich people hiring rock artists to be in their bands. I don't know what was going on with that. It had to do with George Lynch or something. And
I was taking the David Lowy, who's an Australian businessman who's behind the band The Dead Daisies, and I was applying that to another project we had seen on YouTube that only had like 400 followers, but somehow featured George Lynch and a bunch of other known musicians, and we were trying to put together like, how is this happening? Like, who's funding this?
you're under the impression that George Lynch draws more than 400 followers at this point?
Yeah.
I mean, I think the guys.
If it was like 1,500 or 2,000, I'd be like, okay, but like it was for the whole record label project. It wasn't just his, and then he wasn't on every song. It was like a rotating group of people. The whole thing was weird. So we were just theorizing on like, I wonder if this is like a, some dude that's got a little money to spend and wants to have his own little fantasy band or record label or whatever it is.
That's just a weird rich person thing to do. Like, I'm going to get George Lynch.
Go read about David Lowy because he's touring the world with the Dead Daisies and like a rotating group of musicians.
I didn't know that.
It's a real thing.
Amazing.
Opening for Guns N' Roses and like whatever band he likes because he's so rich, he just buys himself onto bills.
It's a B-grade Velvet Revolver.
Yeah.
That's wild.
Trying to make it happen.
Well, more power to you, I guess. I don't know. That's bizarre. You know what's not bizarre, Jay, is our weekly newsletter. It's very unbizarre. It is a calendar of new releases of 80s, 90s, and aughts relevant music, books, documentaries, TV shows.
We just published our first mixtape today.
Oh yeah, that's right. Our 80s metal mixtape.
Going through the episodes now and pulling the songs we talk the most about and throwing them on playlists and doing little write-ups on them so you can kind of catch up on any episodes you missed or bands you didn't hear, and get the playlists on Spotify or Apple Music.
And
so we'll be doing that too.
For the 90s rock part of Dig Me Out, excellent. We've only got 730 something episodes to pull from, so
I'm just gonna start with this year and see how that goes.
You're not gonna do one for a massive mixtape for 700 episodes.
I'll keep going back if it doesn't.
Well, you could do it by
forever.
genre. You could be like every band that we've done that's a punk rock band. You could do a punk rock mixtape. You could do every band that starts with the letter B. You could do, I mean, there's just endless. I mean, think about when you would make mixtapes. You do all sorts of themes for your mixtapes. Are you following the Rob from High Fidelity, where you start with something, rocking, and then you amp it up and then you bring it down? Like, are you following the...
At this point, I'm just doing it in sequence of the episodes, but yes, we could do all of those things. That alone takes a lot of time. So,
got it. And will these be available on CDR or Maxell 60-minute cassettes?
I mean, to keep it legit, I want to, dub it to a Memorex.
A Memorex? Okay.
Right? Those bright colored, clear Memorex tapes that were like super cheap, but...
You mean one of these?
There you go.
Right here, right? Unopened, a 90-minute Memorex.
Right. We'd want to throw them on there, mail them out.
How about that? How about that prop? Just waiting for me to pull out.
Damn.
Name something else. I'll have it within arm's reach. Do you have the new Gin and Juice by Dr. Dre and Snoop Dogg? Yes, I do. Gin and Juice by Snoop Dogg and Dr. Dre comes in 4 delicious flavors. It's gin and melon. They're not a sponsor, but hopefully they will be. If we were going to add a sponsor, it would be. I like that. What's funny about this is that even the can, let me see, where's the can? Even the can has a parental advisory sticker on it. Classic. All right.
It should.
Box newsletter, as I mentioned, that's at Substack. You can also check out the 80s Metal podcast there. And lastly, Apple Podcasts is where you go to leave positive feedback for the show. For Jay, I'm Tim. We're out. We'll be back next week with another episode of Dig Me Out.
If you touch me, I'll kill you.